Time for Football at 4. Johnny Mac's in the house, and, of course, we talk football every day at this time here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Johnny Mac, what's going on, my man?
Not much. How are you, Mike?
All is well. Now, we are a couple of days since the Jalen Hurts thing, but yet there are still, opinions, and Howie Roseman has been all over the place, and not much has changed, it feels like, for the fans out there. I don't feel like the fans are feeling better about this pick, but one of the things that I heard Howie Roseman say, he was on Pro Football Talk, and he talked about how many times over the years that the Eagles have needed backup quarterbacks. He went back to 2002 with A.J. Feely. He went back to using Mike McMahon and how that didn't work out, and that they had Michael Vick, and that they had Jeff Garcia, and that they had Nick Foles. So he really is trying to stress how important the backup quarterback is, but I guess that is now admitting that Hurts is, in fact, their backup quarterback, because on Saturday they tried to say, well, Nate's here too, don't forget about that.
Yeah, no question. And I was the one who asked Doug Pederson, because if you think about Doug's history since he's been back as the head coach, at first he had Nick Foles, then he had they went out and got Josh McCown. So he's always emphasized not only experience in the backup position, but extensive playing experience. So not just years, not just time around the league, but also significant time on the field and playing. And I said, this is a premium draft pick, so he's going to be your backup quarterback. How do you feel about that? And essentially Doug said, well, Nate's here, and not necessarily. But, Nate hasn't played either. So from that standpoint, the playing experience is just out of the equation now. So it's pretty clear that the Eagles like the player. They like the evaluation. On another forum, Howie talked about 2012 and Russell Wilson missing out on him, and tried to compare it to that. And they wouldn't have gotten him in the third round. That's nonsense. Never mind fourth round. The Raiders.
Well, you're starting to hear, right? You just said the Raiders. I would say, John, you're starting to hear more and more that more and more teams did have a second round look at him.
He wouldn't have, to be honest, he wouldn't have lasted to the third round. Pretty confident, but the source I talked to said the Raiders were at, I think, 80 in the third round, and they said there was no way. That was the floor. There was no way he was getting past the Raiders, and unlikely he would have even reached them at that point. Now, obviously, the Eagles were at 103, I think, was their next pick.
Yes, 103 in the third.
There's no way they would have gotten him in the third round, never mind fourth round. So that was the decision they made, and there's a lot into it. And that's the thing where I think everybody has gone into camps. And I talk about this all the time. And there's the camp that, they don't think Carson Wentz has durability. They value the position. The evolution of the game. Everything is thrown into it. All these little things are thrown into the decision. They're all a part of it. But if you're going to ask me, and I said this yesterday on the show, if you want to put percentages on it, no question, it's about the durability of Carson Wentz. And by the way, you can't really fault the Eagles for that. I mean, there's no proof that this guy's going to be there at the end of the year. We're talking 3 consecutive years. What's the old saying? Fool me once, fool me twice, fool me 3 times, fool me 4 times.
Well, and
you got to do something.
Yeah, and that's essentially. And now let me ask you about this opinion in terms of a lot of people are mad at the pick because they're essentially saying you took a guy as a backup quarterback and you already have a franchise quarterback that you paid a lot of money. But it sounds as if Howie is basically the message is we value that position more than we value linebacker or corner or safety or interior line. Like, in other words, he actually said with Florio that their goal is to have 2 of the top 10 quarterbacks in the league on their roster. That's what they want. That's how valuable they find that position. So they're saying in round 2 that getting, even if it's just a backup quarterback, forget all the other things that they think that Hurts could possibly do. More on that coming up. But that they find more value in the backup quarterback than they do these other positions.
Well, and again, I think that is legitimately part of the conversation. I don't think there anything is, but I understand how he's trying to spin things favorably in the organization's direction. He has to encompass understanding Carson Wentz's psyche and the realization of the human part of it that I talk about all the time. You have to go in a certain direction. And by the way, having two top 10 quarterbacks on one team, that's absurd. It's never happened in the history of the league. It's probably never going to happen. Maybe you could argue Brett Favre, Aaron Rodgers back in the day.
Kurt Warner was on that team.
But even in the point of that, where somebody turns out to be a star,
right.
You don't know at that particular time. I mean, I think Aaron was 6-10 in his first year, maybe, and then took off in his second year. So he wasn't a top 10 quarterback as a backup quarterback. You can't because you're not playing, number one. Number two, you just don't. You need that experience, that game time experience. So it's easy to say, it's easy to talk about. That's ridiculous to even assume that you could get in that position. And if that's your goal, you're wasting time. I'll give my buddy Sheil Kapadia from The Athletic. He brought up a good point, I think, yesterday, or maybe it was today even. If this is Patrick Mahomes, the Eagles aren't doing this. And he's right. I mean, he's 100% right in the fact that you can say all you want. If you think your franchise quarterback is Patrick Mahomes, is the guy, the top of the mountain, you're not worried about having two top 10 quarterbacks. The largest part of this decision, and again, I'll emphasize, all of this stuff is encompassed in the decision. But by far the largest part was the durability issue. By far the largest part.
All right, I want to play this bite from Sal Powell. He was on Scott Van Pelt Sports Center last night. He sent one of his famous text messages to Doug Pederson, and this was the response he got from Doug. Take a listen.
Well, this is a Doug Pederson pick. There's no question about it. Doug Pederson wants Jalen Hurts' skill set on this football team, Scott. Right after the pick, I texted Doug Pederson. I said, A, you got Carson Wentz. B, you have other needs. Why did you take this guy? And here's what he texted me back. He has a great skill set that we can use as a quarterback and as a runner. He's tough, competitive, and a proven winner. That, to me, Scott, sounds like a head coach who wants this guy to make an immediate impact on his football team.
So do you think that Doug Pederson had heavy influence on making this pick?
Yeah, of course. He's the head coach of the team. He's a former quarterback.
I feel like, though, John, in the past, we've never really viewed Pederson as a guy who had his voice or his influence on draft picks.
Yeah, and I wrote about this. I mean, one of the things that I think is so unique about Doug as a coach is his selflessness and the fact that anybody else wins the Super Bowl. I've brought this up numerous times. They immediately go for more power. They try to seize more power when it comes to personnel. It's been a pitfall for a lot of guys. I mean, you saw guys who don't win Super Bowls like Chip Kelly. I mean, the minute they see a vacuum, they try to seize power. Doug never did that. Doug hasn't done that. I wait for it every year, and I wait for the whispers, and I haven't come. And I'm pretty amazed by that. But I think part of it is he is listened to, and he is part of the process. And he's been pretty consistent that his expertise is coaching, not evaluating talent. But, if you go back, and I'll bring up Russell again, if you go back to 2012, Doug was here. He was the quarterback's coach. He was the big part of the evaluation of Russell Wilson, one of the main reasons why the Eagles wanted Russell Wilson so badly. So it is a bit of a sea change in the fact that he's had a type since he's been here, and Carson's 6'5", and Nick's 6'6", and Josh McCown's 6'4", Nate's 6'6", maybe even a little bit taller than that. So he's had these big, strapping pocket style quarterbacks. Carson obviously much more mobile than the rest of them, but still frame wise, a lot of similarities. Whereas Jalen is not that. It's bigger than Russell Wilson, but different type of quarterback. But Doug has liked those types of quarterbacks before, so it's always about the player. There's no doubt he likes his skill set. There's no doubt the Eagles like his skill set. That has nothing to do with it. I mean, that's obvious, but what they did, what the strange part of it is the fact that you just paid the franchise quarterback what you paid him last June or whatever it was, and now you're going out and drafting another quarterback. And by the way, the mixed messaging of it all, that is something I don't think that's been brought up enough as well. You know, why is Alshon Jeffrey in the doghouse? To protect the quarterback. Why is not a veteran receiver? Howie went on record with this. Why didn't they target a veteran receiver? Because they wanted a young receiver to grow with Carson Wentz. You know, on one hand, it's the kid glove treatment. Let's protect the franchise quarterback. And then on the other hand, you're taking another quarterback in the second round? How do you think that makes them feel?
Yeah.
The messaging is bizarre.
Yeah, no, there's no question that, and I think the point you made about Patrick Mahomes and having that, young, because the Rodgers stuff, Rodgers is 36 years old. I can understand it. He went through the same thing. It's like, it's hard for him to justifiably be mad at them for taking a quarterback when they did it. I know what I'm saying. It's hard to justify it, though, when he got drafted into the same situation and has become a great player because of the situation he was put into. Now, could he have played 3 years earlier and maybe he holds some spite over the fact that he didn't get on the field right away? Possibly. But this situation is different because, as you mentioned, if this is Mahomes, I agree with you. I don't think they do it, but it's because of the injury. I think that's the underlying thing here, is that Wentz hasn't been able to finish, coupled with two things, John. How valuable the quarterback has been in this franchise's history in the past. The 1 year they didn't have a backup was miserable with Mike McMahon and a bunch of other guys. And you can go back to the Cunningham year when they had to go through Jim McMahon and Kemp and Ken O'Brien and a bunch of clowns that year. This organization has had that position as a high value. So the injury thing, it keeps coming back to they don't think he can stay healthy. And I think that's where you hit on the head with they wouldn't do this with Mahomes. And Mahomes did get hurt last year, by the way. But he also mentioned, now he didn't mention coronavirus, but he did say with the way this season, he was asked about coronavirus, and he said, well, that does have some merit, but that's not why we made the pick. But that the way this season is set up is that there's a good possibility a lot of guys are going to get hurt again this year because they don't have the off seasons.
Yeah, and that's the question, and you can't, and I say this all the time, you can't legislate against injuries. So it really comes down to, there aren't 32 competent starting quarterbacks in the NFL. There never is. There never will be. So again, to assume you're going to have, you just went through having the best kind of backup quarterback you could ever have in Philadelphia in 2017. That's what you're looking for in a backup quarterback. And probably you have to go back to Jeff Hostetler, who did the same thing in New York when Phil Simms got hurt. Those are the types of guys. Those are good backup quarterbacks. I compare a backup quarterback more to a utility man in baseball. And people will say, you want this talent it doesn't work, because what do you need as a utility man? You're not going to play a lot. You might play once a week. You might pinch hit. You might get in a bat here. And a lot of guys can't handle that. And the guys who can do it are really, really valuable. So I think there's this mentality that, you get the best player, the most talent, and you put him behind the talented starting quarterback, and he's a good backup. I don't think that's necessarily the case. number one.
Mm-hmm.
So to shoot for that, I think is, especially what the Eagles have been through. You've gone through the history, but a lot of that history is you're not talking about great starting quarterbacks. So when you go back and forth between Michael Vick and Kevin Cobb and all that, you didn't have a Carson Wentz at the top who was showing you, at least for a very short period, that he was an MVP caliber quarterback back in 2017. You didn't have that clear-cut star. You have to go back to Donovan, and there's some injuries there as well. So I think a lot of that is overrated, you know?
Yeah. Well,
and the goal should be to get Nick Foles or Jeff Hostetler, not to get, unless you're trying to bridge like the Packers are trying to do. We'll go back to the Packers. The Packers have a quarterback who's now, as you mentioned, 36 years old. They're going to try to bridge just as they did with Brett Favre. That makes more sense. I don't see a lot of the sense the Eagles are trying to do and trying to say, we're going to have two of the top 10 quarterbacks in the NFL. That doesn't make sense.
Howie said that while he was not surprised at the reaction, he thought the reaction would change once they saw Hurts' film and then heard him talk, and that he's surprised that people still feel the same way about the pick after seeing how good of a guy is. Are you surprised that he admitted that?
Well, a little bit. I mean, right after the pick, is that how he acted like on Zoom, like he didn't understand. Like, I mean, you know, really the entire draft, he was acting like, oh, this is just a normal pick. And I joked that, you know, Doug Pederson called it, it's not the sexiest pick in the world. He actually said that, you know, like it's the sexiest pick in the entire draft. Everybody lost their minds over it. So either the Eagles were caught completely unaware, didn't understand the reverb that this would create, and I find that hard to believe, or they were trying to play it off and hoping it would die down. I mean, nobody should know the city of Philadelphia and this area and the entire Delaware Valley better than the Eagles. Everybody knows how this fan base lives and dies with this team. And then you throw COVID-19 on top of it. There's no baseball. There's no nothing. There's no basketball playoffs. It's all Eagles all the time. And the NFL draft was the only thing going on. If anything, I'm surprised it wasn't worse than it was, and the Eagles should have known that. And I think they were taken off guard by it.
I think so.
And only after 24, 48 hours did Howie start shifting and admitting some of these things.
Right, and I think a lot of people are in the camp of what you said is that, I think a lot of people are in the camp that either they think that, look, they got this as insurance because Wentz gets hurt a lot and they're okay with that. But then there's the other side of saying they don't trust Carson Wentz, period, and this guy was taken to replace him, but they don't think he'd be ready for a couple of years, so they still have Wentz under contract. Now, do you think there's a scenario where they would just look at Wentz and say, you're not our guy? Like, do you read between the tea leaves and say that is a possibility?
Yeah, it's easy to figure out how that goes. And that's Carson gets hurt again. Jalen is forced into the lineup and plays well. And then from the Eagles standpoint, you say to yourself, well, we have a chance to have a cost-effective quarterback. We talk all the time about roster building, about how you have to take advantage of the young quarterback on his rookie contract. Russell Wilson, again, being the perfect example. If he hits early in his career, he turns into a star very early. You have a short window. Take advantage of that before you have to pay the quarterback top-of-the-line money.
Now, that's interesting because we talk about the quarterback room, and they won one Super Bowl, and it was because they had a good quarterback room, and that's the only blueprint they know, so they're going to try to recreate that. But the other blueprint is not paying the quarterback a whole heck of a lot of money, even though they just did, and do they regret it?
No, I don't think they regret it. I don't think they regret it, and I don't think they dislike Carson Wentz as a player. I think that part of it is silly. I think the part isn't silly is that they are wary of his durability, and that has, more to do with how he plays, I think, than anything else.
Uh-huh.
And they realize he's susceptible to injuries. And they realize, they've been talking to him since the day he got here about trying to protect his body on the field a little bit more. And he's kind of headstrong when it comes to that. So they're very concerned about his durability. And so I don't think that part of it comes into question. It's not that they don't like him as a player. What I'm trying to say is if the worst thing does happen and he does get hurt in week 2 or week 3, and then you say to yourself, okay, Jalen Hurts is forced to play, and then he turns into a star. Let's just, for the sake of argument.
Willie Beeman.
That's where I'm saying.
What was that movie?
That completely changes their thought process.
Yeah.
Because at that point, they'll say, we got the cost-effective guy who proved he can play, who proved he's a star in this league, and we got the guy that's getting paid $25, $30 million that somebody else, by the way, will want because this is a quarterback-efficient league. Then you trade the quarterback that makes $25, $30 million. You don't trade the quarterback that is getting $1.5 million a year for 4 years.
Right, exactly.
That's how it changes.
There was a quarterback veteran that was signed for very little money today. Would you have gone down that route and gone with a guy like Winston if you could have?
Well, yeah, I brought this up because, that's a really, really talented guy who makes a lot of mistakes, no question about it. But remember, Howie Roseman, he called this a quarterback factory. So, I brought up the point, there aren't a lot of guys on this planet that can throw for 5,000 yards. There aren't. There's probably 10. Maybe you can stretch it to 15. It's not taking away the mistakes, but the point is you're talking about top-tier elite arm talent when you're talking about Jameis Winston. So in theory, if you have a quarterback factory, you should be able to get him in here and prove. I think, a lot of the fans, get their backs up and they say, well, this guy threw 30 interceptions. Well, you're assuming stagnation. But if he comes in here in this haughty organization that says they can make quarterbacks out of everybody, he should improve, correct?
You would think. That's a great point.
If you're looking for a veteran quarterback who can go win in that Seattle situation, because that's what the Eagles brought up again, and something like that happens next year, who do you think is more prepared to win that game? Jameis Winston or a rookie Jalen Hurts who hasn't had an off season? It's not even a conversation. So, where do the Eagles think they are? If they really wanted a guy that can go win you 1 or 2 games, they should have been in that conversation. And, oh, by the way, I have no idea if Jameis would have wanted to come here. None of that. This is just all just discussing the situation. The Eagles weren't interested. So it's not really from that standpoint either. But the point is, they weren't looking for this Nick Foles type veteran backup quarterback when they got Jalen Hurts, because they think Jalen Hurts can be, as Howie just said, a top-tier quarterback in this league. So they're on to a different conversation. And I go back to my baseball utility man. Luis Sojo is my best example. Now, if you were forced to play him, if you remember him, Mike, if you were forced to play him 130, 140 games, he would stink up the joint for you. But once a week, played everywhere, third base, shortstop, second base, first base, just clutch hitter. He could do that, come off the bench. Can a star who's used to playing do that? More often than not, they can't. So
unless he's the guy. Who was the guy from the Rays? Played all over the place. That guy. What was his name? Ben Zobrist. Yeah, Ben Zobrist, who was kind of an all-star utility player. They're few and far between, though.
Yeah, they're very few and far between because it's a really, really difficult job, and it's a different skill set, and it's not the same to just come into a game after somebody gets hurt. It's different than preparing all week. We've talked about Vaitai as a tackle. How much better is he when he gets to prepare during the week than he gets thrown into the game? They're different skill sets. Nick Foles had the skill set of a great backup quarterback. Jeff Hostetler did. It's generally not guys who do have the top tier talent for two reasons. A, they're starting somewhere. And B, they're not happy in that role. That's another part of it. So there's a lot of pitfalls here for the Eagles.
Sure is.
I'll just say that. And it starts with Carson Wentz and the psyche. And that's the part where I think the Eagles got it wrong. And I've called this a laboratory pick, and that's what I think it was. This, to me, strikes like somebody not taking into account the human aspect of things and the fact of how this is not only going to impact Carson Wentz. What about that locker room? You just went through this last year. What if he's having a bad game? What if he's having a bad stretch? What if you have another receiver? What if these young receivers come in and become very good friends with Jalen Hurts and they don't think they're getting the ball enough because Zach Ertz is getting the ball? Do you see all these things that could happen? I'm very surprised the Eagles made this decision.
John McMullen, Football at 4 at JF McMullen, Sports Illustrated, and, of course, every day right here at 4 o'clock on the Sports Bash. Hashtag Football at 4. We'll do it again tomorrow. Thanks, pal.
All right. Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, man. Great stuff today from John.